In this video, we'll be examining intersectionality, privilege, and oppression. What is intersectionality? Have you ever heard it before? Intersectionality is a theory, a method, a framework coined by Dr. Kimberle Crenshaw. Now, she is a Black feminist criminologist scholar, American civil rights advocate, and a professor at UCLA and the Columbia Law School. Now, what does intersectionality mean? Intersectionality examines how intersecting identities influence and/or shapes people's experiences with privilege and oppression. Now, what is privilege and oppression? Privilege is the status of earning unearned benefits in society, whereas oppression is the status of restricted liberties and freedoms. Now, unfortunately, there are identities that are stigmatized and marginalized within select societies. Now, depending upon society, privilege and oppression will look different and will select different identities in order to marginalize and enfranchise differently. So let's get into the nuts and bolts. Privilege is groups that have ready access to unearned societal benefits, such as social acceptance, ample access to opportunities and social inclusion, perpetually perceived innocence, and also benefit of the doubt in dubious situations, and etc. Now, oppression, there are no unearned benefits. People often have to work to attempt to earn these unearned benefits, such as social inclusion, perpetually perceived innocence, benefit of the doubt. However, they're not guaranteed to get them, those with oppressed and or marginalized identities. So that leads to a restriction of liberties and freedoms that those with privileged identities have more experience with, and more opportunity to experience. So let's give two examples. When it comes to privilege, due to the patriarchy, which is the rule of men, okay, in Western societies and other societies, patriarchy values men, particularly cisgender heterosexual men. Now, since patriarchy values men over anyone else, that means that same system devalues women and other gender identities. So how would this create a clear application for you to follow? We have the fatherhood premium and the motherhood penalty. Consider a man and a woman get together, they marry, they make a baby, and they both are working professionals. Whereas at the same job, the father would be praised for starting a family. He will face acceleration within the workplace. However, a woman at the same occupation will not. She will often be termed as lazy, not able to work, and an inconvenience since she is starting a family. That is a consequence of living in a patriarchal society. However, when it comes to oppression, let's give a clear example here with Black trans women. You have stigmatized identities such as Black due to white supremacist ideologies, and ethnicism, or what you know as racism, and also trans identities, okay? When it comes to heteronormativity, which is the normalization of heterosexuality as the norm in whatever society you can imagine heteronormativity can exist, okay? So whereas women is also stigmatized identity when it comes to patriarchy due to sexist ideologies that stem from this patriarchy. So that's how Black trans women end up facing the highest disproportionate rate of murders compared to anyone else within the within the LGBTQ plus community. No one else faces this disproportionate rate of murders that Black trans women face. And when you have all of these intersecting identities coming together to create these unique experiences with oppression, that leads and helps informs and shapes this high murder rate when it comes to Black trans women. So I hope that these examples give you a clear consensus of what privilege and oppression means, and also what it can look like in the real world. Now, let's get some key things clear when it comes to intersectionality. Intersectionality is not an identity. People are not intersectional, nor do they have intersectionality. People have intersecting identities, but people do not have intersectionality. Intersectionality is a theoretical framework, examination, and method in order to examine how people's intersecting identities create, shape, and influence these shifting experiences with privilege and oppression. And notice how I say shifting, because in one context, a person can experience privilege, whereas in another context, a person can experience oppression based upon the same makeup of identities that they have. They don't change. Intersectionality is also not a ranking system. This theory and method does not rank people in order of which they experience privilege and oppression. Oh, Susie has X, Y, and Z identities, so she's more oppressed than Joe, who has X, Y, and Z identities. Okay, it doesn't work like that. Intersectionality examines how intersecting identities create unique experiences, these unique shifting experiences with privilege and oppression. Again, in one context, the tables may turn. A stigmatized, a marginalized person may experience privilege in comparison to a person with more privileged identities within that particular society. It depends upon context. So going forward, we already gave an example with Black trans women. We're also given an example with GM workers. So GM, General Motors, faced a lawsuit by a collective of Black women, accusing the auto manufacturer of stigmatizing, discriminating, and totally eliding Black women from their hiring process. Now, GM made a counter argument saying that, hey, we hire women and we hire Black people. So their argument that we don't hire Black women is false. Black women said, you hire white women and you hire Black men that you barely keep on, but you hire to hit those quotas for the government. However, you do not hire Black women. Okay, so that was the argument. And also another clear example of intersectionality, being in the same environment, i.e. GM, an auto manufacturer, but you have different experiences as a worker or potential worker there. Now, let's be clear about intersectionality. We're not talking about that people's identities cause their experiences with privilege and oppression. Oh, because you are a woman, you face sexism. No, it's because of sexism, because of folks being sexist, that causes sexism that women can face, okay? So make sure to keep that in mind in your written assignments. I do not want to see because she is Black, or because she is lesbian, or because he is disabled, they face experiences with ableism, homophobia, transphobia, racism, ethnicism. I don't want to see that in your written assignments. What causes these oppressions? People do, not the victims, okay? Not the survivors of this oppression, not the survivors of the abuse. Those who are running and operating within sexist, racist, ableist, transphobic, homophobic ideologies. And I'm not listing specific identities here because anyone can be within these paradigms. However, there's a difference. Women cannot be sexist against other women. Surprise, women cannot be sexist against other women. However, they can have internalized sexism that they then engage in horizontal sexism with other women. So, in order to distribute sexist ideologies, a woman has to believe the sexist stereotypes and ideologies about herself. So this particular woman believes that women are not good in math, for example, that women are bad drivers, that women are emotionally irrational. This woman believes that. So she polices and treats other women poorly based on these sexist beliefs that she has internalized about her own group. That is how a member within the same marginalized class can implement sexist or any other ist or obic ideologies. So keep that in mind. Women cannot be sexist against other women, and you can go down the line with ableist. Trans folks cannot be transphobic against other trans people. Gay people cannot be homophobic against other gay people. They have to have internalized homophobia, internalized transphobia, internalized ethnicism, or what you know as racism. Okay, just to get that clear. Victims' identities solely by existing do not cause their experiences with oppression. Those who are enacting sexist, racist, homophobic, ableist, classist, ageist beliefs, those are the perpetrators of oppression, not the victims themselves. So we must get into a vocabulary refresher. Bias, prejudice, stereotypes, marginalization, discrimination, oppression, and privilege. We already know what oppression and privilege means. Oppression is the restrictions of liberties and freedoms. Privilege is unearned benefits, okay? Now, when it comes to bias, that is an unfair favor for or against someone and something, and that builds into prejudice, which is the negative attitudes about a particular individual or group of people based upon the bias against that individual's or group's identities. That also feeds into stereotypes, which are overgeneralized, oversimplified beliefs about a particular group of people, which can manifest into marginalization, which is this othering of an individual or a group of people whom society perceives as different from the mythical norm. And this can materially manifest within discrimination. So whereas marginalization is more theoretical, discrimination is all about the action. So cruel, harmful, differential treatment of a particular individual or group of people based upon the prejudice against that individual's or group's identities. And that feeds into oppression, which is discrimination at the institutional level, where individuals and their groups, freedoms, and liberties are restricted. And again, those with marginalized identities have to work for these societal benefits as they are not guaranteed. Whereas those in privileged positions with privileged identities are institutionally favored, where they receive unearned benefits. So whenever I ask my class to compile a list of privileged identities and characteristics and marginalized or othered identities and characteristics, they will come up quickly with several examples, although they may not necessarily understand how privilege and oppression exist or work. But oddly enough, all of my students are able to come up with at least one privileged or marginalized identity. And that shows you how pervasive these privileged and oppressive systems operate within our society. So here are some examples. With privileged identities, you have heterosexual, cisgender, middle upper class, white, male, able-bodied, straight hair, young, age, educated, famous, socially liked, and skinny, Western society. Whereas marginalized identities, you have kinkier hair, LGBTQIA+, Black women, poor and working class, disabled, uneducated, heavier set folks, folks of color, unemployed, older age, women, transgender, gender nonconforming, okay? So Audre Lorde termed those with privileged identities as belonging to this mythical norm. Now, this mythical norm is classified as this normative person, or this person or group of people considered to be the norm of society, where no one assumes that there's anything marginalized about them, okay? And they are socially accepted, receive societal favor, also institutional instructional favor, and they're often embraced with unrestricted liberties and freedoms. And within the American context, you have white, male, man-identified, heterosexual, thinner fit, able-bodied, religious, particularly Christian and Catholic, middle class, Western nationality culture, industrialized, whereas those were marginalized and or oppressed identities are not deemed as a norm, not deemed as a standard or regular, and therefore not socially accepted. And with the American context, this would be folks of color, female, classified folks, woman identified folks, LGBTQIA plus folks, disabled, curvy or heavy set, Eastern religion or non-religious, poor, Eastern nationality, culture, or non-industrialized nations. So again, this mythical norm is within the context of the continental United States and not necessarily synonymous among a transnational sample. And we'll be examining how transnational cultures address LGBTQ plus issues when it comes to gender, sex, and sexuality, and also accounting for identities such as ethnicity, able-bodiedness, and etc. So there are varying systems of privilege and oppression that many people are not familiar with. So I want you to take a second to correspond each identity with the corresponding system of privilege and oppression that may either uplift it or disenfranchise it. So with ethnicity, we have ethnicism or racism, and I say ethnicism because there are multiple ethnicities, but only one human race, okay? So the tenets and branches of ethnicism, would be skin color and hair texture, which leads into colorism and texturism. Now, when it comes to racist, white supremacist ideologies, colorism often privileges those with a looser hair texture, not a coily or curly hair texture. That was texturism. So texturism embraces a looser hair texture and a not curly or coily hair texture, whereas colorism embraces lighter skin complexions, lighter skin shades, and relevance to darker skin shades. Now, what does this sound reminiscent of? Racism. Again, because colorism and texturism are tenets or branches or the spawns of racism, or what I call ethnicism. It's a shame that you have to pass a law called the Crown Law in order to prevent discrimination of hair textures within the workplace, because Black women specifically for years, for generations, have always had issues trying to simply earn a living at work without folks coming down on the style or on the texture of their natural hair. Now, when it comes to class, that corresponds with classism, where society often privileges those with more money, more assets, okay? When it comes to education as well, now in comparison to working class or poorer class folks. Gender, that system is sexism and transphobia, okay? Where society privileges men in relevance to women. Transphobia is often when those who are cisgender inflict discrimination, oppressive ideologies among trans people, okay? So ableism often privileges those who are able-bodied more so than those who have disabilities, whether they be physical, mental, etc. When it comes to sexuality, you have homophobia and heterosexism. Heterosexism is a gender-specific type of homophobia. So folks may not take a liking to, let's see here, feminine presenting gay men in comparison to masculine presenting gay men, or when it comes to masculine presenting gay women in comparison to feminine presenting gay women. That's another way to think about heterosexism. Now, when it comes to homophobia, it is the privileging of heterosexual folks in comparison to gay, lesbian, bisexual folks. Now, I throw bisexual in there because people often lump anything or anyone, any variation of queer within this stigmatized group. Okay, so keep that in mind. However, there is a phobia called biphobia. That's the one that's specific when it comes to phobias. Okay, So when it comes to xenophobia, it's this privileging of those with a naturalized origin in comparison to those who are considered foreigners. Okay. Ageism. Now, this is a tricky one. Depending upon the context, either older or younger folks can be stigmatized or disenfranchised when it comes to age. But more often enough is older people who face ageism. And these can all vary upon context, environment, space, and place. However, again, what we said with the previous slide, all of these can be internalized. So those who are victims of these types of oppression can have internalized classism, internalized sexism, and so forth. Now, how do all of these concepts fit together? This is a partial visual media representation of the oppression and discrimination map, the privilege, oppression, and discrimination map, where you have roots at the top, okay, and branches in the middle and leaves at the bottom. But I've cut out this particular section of the map so we can make this as clear as possible. So this is the map in full. Here you have branches, okay? Think about this as an upside down tree. You have roots at the top. I misspoke. You have roots at the top. Then you have the branches in the middle. And then you have the leaves right at the bottom, okay? I want us to focus on the roots here, okay? So when you have the roots of white supremacist ideologies that were spread via white transnational colonization, okay, in combination with patriarchy, which is the rule of men, in combination with heteronormativity, which is the privileging of cisgender and heterosexual folks. So this should be called cis heteronormativity, okay? All of that operates together. That's where these arrows come in. All of these terms operate together and intersect together to create a system where cisgender, heterosexual white men rule a particular society. Now, nature doesn't decide that. The trees didn't get together and the cats didn't get together and decide that, you know what, cisgender, heterosexual white men is going to rule this particular part of the world. No, people, human beings decided that, okay? Via transnational colonization, all right? Worldwide domination, imperialism, okay, and genocide. So keep that in mind. So all of these things can exist in isolation. However, all of these can give birth, these roots can give birth to the branches that you see here via institutional media, images, symbols, family, peers, culture, and macro institutions. I'm going to take this out so we can stay focused, okay? All of these intersect together to give birth to these individual branches, all right? Ethnicism, or what you know as racism, which can also be internalized. Sexism, which can be internalized. Classism, which can be internalized. Heterosexism, which can be internalized, and so forth. I didn't put every other source branch of oppression here due to room space, okay? So it's not that they're purposely elided. It's just for the fact that I ran out of space on the page, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, racism can come solely from white supremacist ideologies. Sexism can come solely from patriarchy. Classism, okay, can be done through capitalism. Heterosexism, all right, which can be infiltrated, not infiltrated, that's the wrong word, but cultivated, there we go, from cis heteronormativity. So all of these can also be born from the combination and intersection of white supremacist, cis, heteronormative, patriarchal society, cis, hetero, patriarchy. You can put in whatever combination of terms you want. So those are the branches. I'm going to take this back out again because I have to make a different point. So without these roots up here, which is white supremacist ideologies, patriarchy, and heteronormativity, the branches, which is ethnicism, sexism, and classism and heterosexism, they wouldn't exist without these roots. So that's why it may be unproductive to focus on eliminating racism, sexism, classism, ageism, and so forth. Because what happens when you cut branches from a tree? It comes back due to the roots still being there. So you have to uproot the entire system of privilege and oppression in order to move more towards institutional equity and equality. Okay. Now, when you come to the branches of oppression, they can give birth to the leaves. Okay. Which you have inter and intra-community conflict between, for example, white folks and folks of color, Black people, when it comes to colorism, texturism, cultural differences. Or another example, when you have conflicts between trans communities, when it comes to passing, degrees of passing, what's considered deviant sexuality, etc. Okay. Also, another example, when you have class conflicts or class clashes between the middle class and the working class. And also, when you have another example of those who do not want to identify as variations of queer, but engage in same gender behavior, which can lead to health complications from a public health perspective, okay, and or standpoint. So these at the bottom are the branches, excuse me, not the branches, the leaves of oppression. Okay. Now, if you focus on cutting leaves, getting rid of texturism, colorism, okay, yeah, you're getting rid of a temporary problem, but the leaves are going to grow back from the branches, right? Because it's the branches is where the leaves are spawned from. So let's say you focus on the branches again, they're going to grow back if you focus on cutting those out because the roots are still there. So you have to uproot the system. Now, this doesn't mean eliminate all people who are have identities such as man or white or straight or cisgender. It doesn't mean eliminate these people. It means simply destabilize, disenfranchise systems that privilege some identities at the expense of others. It is possible for everyone to exist on an equal and level continuum without there being some who benefit or some who do not benefit, right? There is possibility for a continuum to exist, okay? So that's what come to institutional equity and equality. And we'll be examining all of these tenets throughout the semester. So that wraps up our discussion on intersectionality, privilege, and oppression. Again, you must know the intricacies of these terms because these are real lived experiences and institutional systems that shape, influence, and inform our society and how people interact with one another. People's behavior are not just natural entities. Their behavior is informed by seeing, i.e., social learning, seeing and mimicking the behaviors, oppressive, privileged behaviors of other people, and putting folks within groups in their mental, cognitive schemas of their mind. Because once you're able to categorize someone mentally within a cognitive schema, that then influences how you treat them. Okay. And if you treat someone less than, due to the rest of society telling you and influencing you to do so, unfortunately, you're participating as simply part of the problem when it comes to these institutional systems of privilege and oppression. So the point of this video is to educate you on how these systems exist and how you can break free from being mentally enslaved, okay, to these oppressive systems that operate to benefit some at the expense of others. And dismantling these oppressive systems is the epitome of several different types of feminist praxis.